Hi, Misha here, and felt like doing another CNR video, and this is one that's easier for me to be in front of the camera for than behind it. Not to mention you'll actually get things in frame with gyro's help. Let's talk about the Steyr-Mannlicher series. I thought it was pretty good timing because Royal Tiger has had quite a few of these in, or at least variants of these. The 1888. Got a lot of variations in this little gun, and even different cartridges used. But she was pretty short-lived. First generations often were. We'll move into the 1895 here, which actually saw production and service all the way through World War I. Although finding long rifles today isn't so easy. Then we'll talk about the Stutzen and cavalry carbines, and because someone asked, you know who you are, even though it's not the primary focus of this video, I had to bring out the M95-24, also sometimes called the M95M, just for fun. We'll do a complete video on it, why not? But I know you've been wanting to see it, so there it is. We'll even talk about and look at some ammo for these, because another one of you has been asking about vintage ammo. So I thought we'd throw a little in this video to have some fun, because these are interesting guns, and one of the biggest competitors to Paul Mauser in Europe in the late 19th century. Mannlicher himself was quite a prolific arms designer in the 1880s and 1890s, although today he's sadly not as well remembered as Mauser. But we'll get into it. As always, if you could, do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, check out the link to Patreon. With that, let's get into this big and long one. So we begin with the biggest and longest Mannlicher, the 1888. Well, one of them. Now this is a straight pull system, but not like the rest. Safety here, bolt here. But this actually uses a wedge type system for locking the bolt, rather than some type of rotation that you find on later generations or even other straight pulls like the Schmidt-Rubin. Now this uses Mannlicher's kind of, well, literally patented feed system with on-block clips. In fact, this was the third major design he released. The first was the 1885. The next was the 1886. Both were black powder and relatively large diameter guns. The 1888 was still black powder when introduced, but it was the first to fire what was considered a small diameter, higher velocity bullet, 8mm. Yeah, back then 8mm was small. You gotta remember, this is the time of 11mm and whatnot is it's the standard. So the 1888 was the first to use what was considered a small diameter cartridge, 8mm. It used an 8x52 rimmed round, which was still black powder. But unfortunately for Austria and von Mannlicher himself, France had recently rocked the world with its Lebel 1886 and its 8x50 rimmed early smokeless cartridge. So everyone struggled to keep up. This is where you get the German 88 commission rifle. This is where Britain switched from the black powder to the smokeless and the Lee Metford, which had results. And something very similar happened in Austria. The 8890 variant had recalibrated sights, as it had a new 8x52 semi-smokeless cartridge. Basically, it was compressed black powder. It was an interim solution, though. They knew where they were going. Now, there were purpose-built 1890s rifles and carbines, and updated 1888/90s. Either way, pretty much the same. This is the wedge system we just talked about. 5-shot mag. This is a big beefy boy. It's over 9.5 pounds unloaded. Pretty standard infantry barrel length for the day. 30 inches, overall length of 50 inches. Kind of traditional squeeze sights. And we have a stacking rod. So in 1892, they started working on the first true smokeless powder round, which would be adopted in 1895 as the 8x50 rimmed. Now some of these would be again refit, reworked to fire it, being known as the 8895s, but this locking system here, the wedge system, really wasn't strong enough. So production was pretty quickly halted. But all versions and variants, including for export, they built a good number of these, over 1 million. They were primarily built at what we know today as Steyr in Austria, but of course this was during the Austro-Hungarian era. So they were also built at what we know today as FEG, although it was technically a different company at that time. But then this one here came along, and this is a new system. The 1895 Mannlicher. Really a top-down redesign. It still uses the en-bloc system, but now we have a rotating lug bolt with 2 lugs. We have a safety here that you need to disengage to move your bolt. We have a big cocking piece back here. Soldiers nickname this lightning fast. And the reason there's a bit of a hesitation at the beginning, part of it is you're cocking the system, part of it is to try to give primary extraction, which is something that any straight pull does have to overcome. But yeah, we do have double cock capability if the cartridge fails to ignite, 5-shot mag, extended bolt handle, bottom sling swivels. We have a more modern style of rear sight. The rifles were calibrated out to about 1950. Still has a 30-inch barrel, stacking rod. Overall length is still 50 inches, but because of the new system, this is quite a bit lighter. It's over 1 pound lighter, about 8.5 pounds, compared to over 9.5 for the 88. This is a better deal. So it went through trials and was adopted and went into production at Steyr in 1896 and at FEG in 1897. And production would continue all the way up through World War I in 1918, at which time, of course, things would end. Now, these were exported. They weren't just used by the Austro-Hungarians. And beginning in 1903, one of the biggest customers was Bulgaria, who would actually continue to acquire these all the way through the 1930s, in different versions and variants. And they would go to some other places as well. Still firing the 8x50, it was a true smokeless round, but it was still a rimmed round and basically a round nose bullet. So in 1895, it was quite modern, but by World War I standards, it was aging. Now, I will say this system, this straight pull, seems to have performed well in the trenches, as well as anything anyway. You might think it'd be sensitive to mud. And while this is actually a well-built rifle, the tolerances are such that it's not as finicky as you might think. And this feed system, while it does have an open bottom, that's to let the clip drop out, it's pretty robust as well. But unfortunately, you don't find a lot of these long rifles today. But what we do find are carbines. Along with the long rifle, 50 inches, 30-inch barrel, a carbine version was adopted in 1895 and would soon be produced. Actually, there are 2 versions. There was the Stutzen, which was technically a short rifle. It often either had dual sling swivels or just bottom mounted, and a bayonet lug. And it had a 20-inch barrel, giving it an overall length of just under 40 inches, and an overall weight give or take, of about 6 3/4 pounds. Now the cavalry carbine, which we have here, had side sling mounts. And originally it did not have a bayonet lug. That would be added in World War I. The cavalry carbine, therefore, was slightly lighter, but had the same overall length. Same bolt action system. Safety. Shorter sights. These are calibrated out to about 1800 instead of 1950. So a little bit more realistic, but not really for the short barrel. What do you do? I think if they used arshins or paces, it was not meters. It might have been yards. That's why I haven't said. Anyway, you get the units of measurement. Austro-Hungarian Imperial fans, let me know. But the two carbines being produced separately ended in 1913. By World War I, they combined them, basically. Now, you'll still find all kinds of variations in sling swivels on the bottom, on the side, both, sometimes one or the other, especially when it comes to like barrel bands. This one has the movable band. You'll find some that have a fixed band. The swing swivels do change a lot, but the bayonet lug became a standard feature so they could use the same end cap, and really producing two near identical short guns didn't make a lot of sense. These Stutzens were kind of designed for and planned for stormtroops, and of course cavalry carbines were planned for cavalry, also maybe artillery or balloon people, but it gets mixed up in World War I. And they would build a lot of these. Now, primary production of, say, receivers would end with the war, but over 3.5 million were produced. Many were given as war aid, war reparation to young nations like Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia. Bulgaria would continue to get some. And actually in Czechoslovakia, for a year or two, they would assemble a few more from existing parts, maybe manufacturing a few bits and bobs as they needed them, meaning that, at least for the rifle, production would end officially in 1920. And really for the carbines too, but their story is far from over. In fact, they would kind of get a second wind in the 1930s. For you see, this was introduced. Told you we'd get to some ammo. Back when the M95s were coming into the country for, honestly, very cheap, under $100, this ammo was coming in too. This is original 30s Nazi, still Wachland marked ammo in the clips. One thing to note about these Mannlicher clips, they're not omnidirectional, they're unidirectional. You can only put them in this way. So yeah, rimmed around. Now, as I said, the 8x50 was a round nose. They developed the 8x56R here, a Spitzer version. And this was to get some more life out of these guns because interwar budget was not good in Austria. Austria and Hungary were now split apart, no longer the unified empire, and both nations needed to kind of make do with what they had. It was an interim solution. In Austria, they rechambered their guns, marking them with an S over the chamber, and that would be the 9530. Some people call it the 9534, but they would rework them all the way up to about 1940. In Hungary, they would mark theirs with an H, and these would be known as the 9531, or in Hungarian, just 31M. And these would only be done between that time and about 1935, 1936, so slightly shorter period. Of course, Steyr and FEG. So they both would rechamber them. That's why most you find in the U.S. today have S or H over the chamber. If they don't, check it out. They still might be for the earlier 8x50 versus the 8x56. Now, I said we don't see a lot of rifles today, even though they were produced. During this process, many were cut down to carbine length, And you can usually tell them because the front sight is on a band, not directly on the barrel. Also, you get into the whole sling swivel situation. That gets a little thing. So yeah, most of the rifles were cut down to carbines and rechambered. You can still find some that weren't, but yeah, it gives you an explanation. I should also point out that they were refurbished during that time. And because of that, a lot of people think the 95 is kind of a difficult action to actuate. It's not. It's because during the refurb process, the rebluing wasn't the smoothest, and also parts weren't mated up as well. When these left the factory, brand new guns, the bolt, the receiver, everything was fitted together properly. But in the 30s, they still worked just fine. But they were a little less concerned. And you see this with other refurbs too. Look at Mosins. A factory original versus a refurb Mosin, that'll do it every time. But yeah, that was done in the 1930s, along with producing ammo, which meant these were used in World War II, although both nations would switch over to newer designs more or less based on the Mauser, which, yeah, we'll talk about that in a separate video. But, per request, let's briefly mention this interesting jobber here. Call it the M9524, or the M95M. This was done in the young nation of Yugoslavia, who was primarily using Mausers. Mausers firing 8x57 recessed rim. They were given a number of Steyr-Mannlichers as war reparations. Now, Bulgaria was happy to receive these. They were using it, and in fact, they would continue to acquire even the 8x56 version up to the 1930s. But Yugoslavia didn't really have a major use. So they started a program to rework this action to fire 8mm Mauser. And it was a pretty detailed job. They basically installed a 24-inch, well, 23 and some change, Mauser barrel. That's why this is a unique barrel length. It's longer than a carbine, shorter than a Mannlicher rifle, although we have Mannlicher hardware. This does have the side sling bar I was talking about that's fixed, that's the bottom. We have a full-length upper handguard. Note that we have a Mauser-style rear sight. We have standard safety. We have the dual sling swivel here and here. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. You hear that in here? And notice there's no hole in here. That's actually because of the magazine system they ended up going with. They blocked off the mag so it could hold 5 rounds of 8mm. And because there were really no feed lips in there, because those were with the on-block clip, that's part of the system, they took an on-block clip and they modified it to serve that purpose in here. So if you get one of these and there's a clip in there, it's supposed to be there. It's an interesting solution to an issue. How it actually worked in reality, results vary. But again, this was more of a make-work thing, and just to make a few more rifles, since they already had the actions, why not? No one was really going to buy them and swap them Mausers. So, an interesting project in Yugoslavia, and an interesting footnote in the history of Mannlicher systems. It's also worth pointing out that there were even efforts to rework these old ones to fire 8mm Mauser. Those are sometimes called 8824s. If this system was a little weak to fire 8x50 or 8x56 rimmed, you can imagine it really wasn't up to the task of 8x57. But they tried it because, again, money was tight. So what do you think? Let's wrap this up. So for years I wanted an 88, any of the variants, but you couldn't find them. I actually ended up with this one through a collection. These are all pretty well used, as you might imagine, but this one's in pretty good shape for what it is. I mean, at least the action's complete and all there. A little bit of a tight crack in the stock that's been repaired. Oh well. It's got its rear sight. Swivels are there. Yeah, I'm quite happy with it. I was kind of thrilled to find it. Just as an example piece, because this system is unique. But it was just the beginning. Unfortunately, finding a long rifle variant isn't much easier, and this came from a friend a long time ago. It's amazing how much lighter this is. And it's really amazing how light the carbines can be. But of course, firing 8mm, it basically feels like you're being kicked by a mule. But in a good way. They are very light. I mean, some of these get down to 6.5 pounds. Giant fireballs. And this one I just picked up because it was just a weird curiosity. And I'm glad I did. It adds to both a Mannlicher and a Yugoslavian collection. And these do. They don't bring a ton of money today, partially just because they fire a relatively uncommon round. If you do find the surplus ammo, I wanted to mention, it's aging. It's old. Chances are it may not detonate, or you might have hang fires, or maybe only a couple out of a clip will. So if you buy it as vintage, collectible, don't buy it as shooting. Privy Partisan, and maybe S&B too, I can't remember, is actually making 8x56 rimmed occasionally. I bought a few hundred rounds just to have it. So finally someone is making this stuff, but I wouldn't trust the vintage, frankly. And if you do buy one of these, make sure you check to see if it's for 8x50 or 8x56. They're just fun. And everyone knows the Schmidt-Rubin straight pulls, the K31. This one kind of gets left in the dust, even though it saw World War I use, whereas the Schmidt-Rubin really didn't. It's actually the most successful straight pull I can think of as far as production numbers. All told, you're upwards of 5 million. But I just felt like revisiting it. It's kind of a personal favorite of mine, and they're still very affordable considering the history you get. And you do get Steyr and FEG quality in them. So, do you own one? If so, let's talk about which variant you have and what you think. And do you shoot it? I haven't shot any of mine in years, but I used to, 20 years ago, when ammo was available and the guns were cheap. It was a lot of fun. And today, again, Royal Tiger, I believe, maybe a few others have had variations. They've even had some of the 1890 carbines, which I don't have one, as you see. But, oh well, can't have everything. Maybe I'll stumble into one day. Anyway, appreciate you hanging out with us. Chilling, talking milsurp. If you could, like, share, subscribe. And as always, if you could, check out the link to Patreon. And behind the scenes, you have no idea how many Mannlicher jokes J. Rose made throughout recording this video. No idea at all. That poor man, can you imagine what his life in school was? If you think kids in 19th century Europe were like nicer and more genteel in a boarding school, no, they weren't. They were kids are kids. Poor guy. Maybe it explains why he made guns.
Would you say a good Mannlicher is hard to find?
Well, he was a good. He was pretty. I think he was an easy Mannlicher to find. Everyone knew where he was at. We'll catch you very soon. Next time.